Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have Entp Enneagram 7s. And so Samantha, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
This is like the worst question. I hate this question because I have multiple thoughts streaming through my head right now going, oh, which thread should we follow for this particular interview? And I love that about head types is we just, particularly 7s, so many thoughts going in our heads at once. It's just hard to follow which stream is which. So I'm an Enneagram coach. I have lived around the world. I have a humanities background. I used to be a lawyer before I realized that was a terrible idea.
There's nothing humanitarian about being a lawyer, by the way. Never mind.
That's why you can't stay in that career. No, there are some lawyers who are far more humanitarian than others.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I know. You got them.
It takes two to make it some.
Yeah, so really specializing in personality for personal development, really.
Samantha runs the Truity page for YouTube. She has a really awesome page on Enneagram.
Yeah, I'm Truity's lead trainer. I've been doing that for a few years and I love it. It's a lot of fun. But then I also run my own business on the side as well, Individuo, which is using the Enneagram for coaching and other personal development stuff.
Are you an Aussie or are you from I got a bit of an Aussie tech there.
I am. I'm an Australian, but currently living in New Zealand. So you did well. Yeah.
That's amazing. And Boris?
Yeah, I'm not in the humanities. I'm a sociopath. I'm a software developer. Physics background, then switched into engineering. Then self-employed. Anything self-employed is good. Slid into Mbti by accident. I thought it was bullshit. I thought it was what the ESFJ lady in charge of HR does to put a label on me and decide whether or not you should hire me. So normally to me, they're the pit bulls I need to get by so I can talk to the guy in charge and they normally hire me. But so I thought it was, if anything, BS. Learned otherwise by fluke, ended up in a meetup that was N-centric, and now I'm running that meetup 5 years later. I find, this is not about MBTI, but MBTI is very helpful in giving you a vocabulary of understanding self and others, and also to build bridges based on that understanding, how to give a person what they need, or at least the illusion of, and kind of smoothen the wheels a bit in ENTP fashion, maybe. And I find Enneagram also nicely, it complements MBTI. And there's also correlations, because I think a lot of, let's say, ENTPs, ENFPs are probably 7s. So it's just more interesting vocabulary to understand self and other. Because physics is almost easy because it's very predictable, even though at the esoteric level it's not. Whereas people are actually in some sense more interesting, more challenging, and more rewarding.
I've been doing lots of typing interviews lately and many ENFPs, and if they're 7s, it's so obvious it's not funny. If they're not 7s, it's actually a lot harder to figure out because that is so, you see that so strongly. So you have to dive beneath that. It's fascinating.
Interesting. It's going to be a lot of idea bouncing in this video, as you already see.
And the little girl on the side will be pushed out, and she'll be like on the floor, and there'll be her hand coming up. Whoops, you can't see it. It's sticking up. Me too. It's my show.
Yeah. And so, hi, everyone. My name is Joyce, and I'm a certified MBTI master practitioner. And I facilitate the instrument in organizations. I also coach people, and I help people figure out their best fit type. And so, cool. Enneagram 7. As Samantha mentioned earlier, they are head types. Their basic fear is the fear of being trapped in emotional pain, being deprived, limited, bored, or missing out on life and missing out on fun. This can manifest in the form of gluttony.
We're both slim. What are you talking about? Gluttony.
That's taken a lot of work, all right?
And so, gluttony is having this sense of emptiness inside you. So you're filling it up with experiences and stimulation and feelings of positivity in hopes of feeling content and satisfied. Now that the basics of the Enneagram 7 have been covered, Samantha, is there anything I missed that you kind of want to cover?
Well, that's the challenging thing about the Enneagram is there's the tiny nutshell and then there's the rabbit hole of information that you could go down about each type. And so, with 7s, we could talk about how they like to equalize things. They have issues with power. And so they want to give lots of people choice, but they want to equalize things. So they treat the CEO and the janitor exactly the same because that makes them feel more comfortable. And what I find fascinating about some of that is we can see that as a strength. Like when I was, working in corporates, I thought, okay, this is a fantastic strength to be able to have friends and a network across the organization. But it's not until you start to see the other side of that. What does it mean to have that as a strength? Well, it means you're actually really uncomfortable with being either having more power or less power. And throughout your life, there are times when actually having those things and changing that dynamic is really healthy. So it's understanding, those opposites. But what else is there about sevens? Avoiding pain and suffering, wanting to do lots of different things. And they can be a bit hedonistic, but I think that's also one of the stereotypes of sevens, because not all sevens are as hedonistic or as party animals as they're sometimes portrayed to be. And I think that's one of the stereotypes that persists but isn't always true.
Well, I kind of agree, but I also agree that it's too much of a stereotype. If I look at what I look for in life is, I seek pleasure at some level, but I also seek enlightenment. And I think the two, and not like in the extreme sense, but having insights and the sheer experience of experiencing things. And that kind of modulates you because you don't become a real hedonist because insight and wisdom, whatever, comes at the expense of pain and having to deal with the unpleasant. And the stereotype about a seven that we are all avoidant of unpleasant things, I think it's true, but it's simplistic, and it also changes with age because I think I've seen a lot of crap in my life. And I'm still engaged in a lot of things that are depressing, that make you question humanity. And I think I've learned I look at these things, I can face them, sometimes better than many people around me, I believe. It depends on who I surround myself. I might have a low standard there. But once you have a certain degree of maturity, which I proclaim I have, even though I'm immature in other ways, you get the whole picture and you appreciate the good in the world, but just because you know what can happen. And I can look the unpleasant straight in the eye. I've learned that over the years. So that stereotype is really, I think, incorrect based on my perception of it. I don't know what Samantha thinks, but hedonistic is, if you have any sort of desire for insight, which might be an Entp thing, maybe where there's different sevens out there, then you have to learn to face the darker side of things. But then you appreciate the good because you know there's a lot of dark out there. What do you think, Samantha?
Yeah, well, on a number of levels. So sevens are actually very pessimistic internally. So they actually can see all the dark stuff. They're really attuned to anything that's negative. And because they want to move away from it, they're like, okay, how do we make this more pleasant? How do we make this more fun? How do we be more optimistic about this darkness that we can see? We can see the pain, but we want to avoid having to engage with it too much. And so I think we often expect the internal world of sevens to be very positive as well. And it often isn't, because there is that darkness that we can more attune to. And in terms of hedonism, like I always think of it as how fast do you read a book, or how superficially do you read something? So for me, it used to be, how many books can I read as quickly as possible? Like I want a bit of every single book there is. And now I'm like, how could we just read one book all year? Like how could we challenge ourselves to just really focus on one book as opposed to just trying to consume everything?
Going from variety and more variety and new, the next shiny book, to figuring out, what do I actually want to commit a little bit more to? Is like a seven.
I suspect that sensory sevens would be more likely to be closer to the party animal side of things than the intuitive sevens, which could also lead to mistyping. I know I often appear 5-ish, than 7-ish at times.
There are a lot of ENTP and ENFPs who are sevens but look like they're 5-ish because of the intuitive slant.
So you're saying I'm not very 5-ish. I admit it, I'm an ESTP. I've come out. That's it. Samantha, are you a 7 wing 8 or 7 wing 6 or tri-type, or do you not believe in those concepts?
I work with the narrative Enneagram subtypes. So I'm a self-preservation 7.
So you're SP, SO, or maybe you just stop after the first?
No. So it's a sequence. So you have a dominant and a repressed. Yeah. So I'm social repressed.
So you're SP, SX, SO?
Correct.
Okay. I could be wrong. I think I'm SX, SO, SP. So that's what
so you forget to take care of yourself?
I think I do, yeah. Actually, honestly, yeah. Like, for example, taxes. Last night there was a tax deadline. I made sure one of my friends got in, and I got both of the payments in at 11:58 and one at 11:59. But I got hers in first. I'm like, crap, because that's an Entp thing. Do you not find? Okay, maybe 7. There's something about being under duress which almost calms my mind. Like
Makes you focus.
Yes, it's extreme. I don't know if that's an Entp trait. I've noticed that around my friends when they figure out, I get calmer and calmer and more focused. Like, yeah, I got 45 seconds. This couldn't be wrong. Let me start this over here. So it's almost like it's a great state of mind to be in, but it comes at the expense of duress.
Yeah. So Personality Hacker attributes that to the perceiving. If you have NE or SE higher up, you get into a focused state. You get into this flow state when you're time crunched or when like the situation is pressed. It makes you focus more.
It feels almost like a high.
Stressful.
Oh, yeah. Okay. But it might be, maybe it's the SP part. I wonder. I mean, I'm just randomly
sometimes a deadline is fantastic, but I have to have chosen the deadline. Like, you can't give it to me and it can't be irrelevant. Like, if it's an irrelevant, I'm like, that deadline means nothing to me, which is one of my problems with working in the corporate world. I'm like, well, you've just picked that number out of the air. That's pointless. Like, why should I abide by that particular?
I second that. And these are the deadlines I don't want. But I agree with you. If somebody puts up a deadline, I'm like, why? It's like, what? I have to get this done. If I'm convinced I have to get this done by Christmas, don't set me 15 intermittent deadlines. I'm going to fake you out on that if I have to, especially if you're an ESTJ. Like, yeah, sure, here, there it is. Bullshit. But if life throws you deadlines, then that's okay. But it has to be a moment in the moment, right? It's not deadlines I dislike, but if they come up, I'm like, I trust myself. I'm good at this. People are seething next to me and twitching like, okay, what can we do? We got 15 minutes. It feels, that's how I would envision an INTJ works. Probably not at all, because then I have this clarity of vision. I can chop off all these branches, keep 3 going, and pursue the one that's most likely, if not go for second. But it really narrows things down, even though NE is expansive. So it's a nice state to be in if it's not life or death, and if it just happens to emerge, because it's not an artificially set deadline. It's a real deadline that life throws at you, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think deadlines are really useful. It's your relationship to them that I've had to do a lot of work on.
yeah. When they seem more like a construct than something that's there for a purpose, it's like, oh, I'll question it. This doesn't make sense.
But when you're self-employed, you also have to like impose deadlines on yourself to make certain things happen. So then you have to figure out how am I choosing a deadline that is authentic to me, that I'm actually going to want to feel that stress and pressure of, because I know that's going to work for me. But I have to make sure the deadline is appropriate in many ways.
Yeah, I have more buy-in. That's true. I mean, I hate external. Some guy says, I need this done. Like, that's bullshit. You won't even have enough information. You will have to rework it. It's nice. I mean, self-employed is pros and cons. You have to appeal to and please your master, but you also have some distance. You negotiate. You can say, okay, look, I'm here. I'm a little more expensive, but I'm here to provide you this benefit. I'm selling you on the benefit. And now this normally implies you have some leeway of, I believe your deliverable is best achieved this way. You have more freedom. There's nothing worse than being ESTJ and saying, you got to do this and this and this and this. And you're like,
I used to make a plan because they'd ask for them. And once I handed it over, I then just did my own thing. I'm like, right, you've got the plan, you're happy. I'm going to get the outcome done, but I'm going to do it in my flow state kind of way. And everyone was happy.
Double bookkeeping. That's what I call and again, I have this thing. It's gaming the ESTJ. You literally run up to them. Oh, you want a meeting? Let's have another one tomorrow. And then you have this separate bookkeeping. Yep. Did this, like bullshit. But then, do you want to meet again tomorrow? And like, no, I'm typically, okay, we can meet next week. But it's how I deliver it is up to me. And so far it works, right? But
yeah, and for that reason, I believe that ENTPs, they might enjoy self-employment for that reason.
Of course, that's an aspect of self-employment. You have control, you have some agency, and we're not bad at selling somebody on something that makes sense, right? I mean, I like pitching stuff to, let's say, an ENTJ or an INTJ. ENTJ is a little more forceful, but you get their ear if you say, look, you have a business problem to solve, or I have something that will save you money. Do you have 15 minutes? Let me pitch that to you. They will get it. Whereas others that are more SI strong might be just, oh, but that's not how we've been doing this. And I'm like, yeah, you had both experiences, but
the challenge
yes.
I had was that I was very good at pitching ideas without first deciding if that was something I wanted to deliver.
Oh, okay.
And so I got myself in all sorts of situations and going, well, I could deliver this, but turns out I don't like it, or this isn't going as well as I imagined it would have gone. And through that, I learned how, to choose and really focus on the kind of career or work I wanted to do. But it took a lot of those sort of being a bit too opportunistic, as the self-preservation 7 can be, and ending up in situations like, oh, this is not going so well. Oops, start again. But in terms of self-employment, I like that I've crafted something that is uniquely me. I get to do what I want to do all the time. I mean, within some constraints, but I've accepted and I'm happy with those constraints. They're not someone else's constraints. I know I spoke to some ENFPs and INFPs who are like, I can't do what you do, because they felt that I was compromising my values in some way. I'm like, well, no, I'm not, because my values...
I don't have any values. That's what they would say.
It took me a while to get, it's like, what are my values? It took a really long time and over years of doing values exercises to go, oh, okay, my number one value is creativity. And if that is being satisfied every day, I am satisfied. But that took years to finally nail down.
That's awesome. Samantha, you mentioned how the 3 subtypes of the 7 are manifested very differently. So I'm wondering if we could go into that a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. So for people who don't know about the instincts, I'll give you just a really brief overview of the instincts before you combine them with gluttony. So the self-preservation focuses on making sure the body is taken care of and keeping the body alive. And so that can be eating when you're hungry, putting on a jumper when you're cold, going to the bathroom when you need to, also having enough money to have a house and have somewhere safe to live. So sort of thinking that way. The challenge is when that's dominant, it means they think that their life is permanently threatened. Yes. So they're more fearful, they're more anxious, they're more introverted. And so that, shows up and blends in some way. So if you have an extrovert with a dominant self-preservation instinct, they might be more introverted in their presentation. The social instinct focuses on belonging to a group in some form. But when that's a dominant instinct, it means they tend to want to take leadership roles, be more political, have the approval of the group in some form. And then the sexual instinct focuses on bonding with someone one-to-one. So that can be a partner, but it can also be a best friend. It's this like desire for close friends or a singular close person in their life. As a dominant instinct, it means they want to almost become that person in some way, like that person is their world. So they can be more passionate, intense, aggressive, competitive in the way that some of the other types aren't. And they also, it almost gives them greater access to that life energy, that vital energy, so they can actually have a lot more intensity and access to anger than we see with the other subtypes.
ENTPs get angry? I mean, I'm just curious. I don't have any anger issues. In fact, anger is one thing is a red flag for me. Where one of my best friends, he's an INTJ psychiatrist, he would always ask me, okay, are you angry now? No, I'm just annoyed. And he's like, no, he must be, no, I'm just annoyed.
Yeah,
So
and so it's interesting. I get really angry. Anger is something that is really accessible for me. So the self-preservation 7, when you combine it with gluttony, wants to create safety by having a network of people. So as I mentioned earlier, they want to get to know everybody in the organization because knowing everyone will help them meet their needs. So they're more superficial relationships and they're very opportunistic, they're very driven, sort of go-getters in that sort of sense. The social 7 wants to help people. So they want to show that they're not selfish. So they will aim to relieve other people's pain to avoid having to deal with their own. So they're often grief counselors, therapists, doctors, nurses, that sort of something that's sort of pain relieving for others. And so they're far more mellow, and they'll take the smallest slice of cake to show that they're not selfish. I will take the largest slice of cake. And I just want no one to see that I'm taking the largest slice of cake, but I'm not taking the smallest slice. That's not happening. And then the sexual 7 is the most optimistic. They are the most, the bright and shiny. They're sort of very excited and they love to be excited and they get excited by excitement. It's really wearing the rose-colored glasses in how they see the world and their relationships.
I hear that, and I'm just wondering, assuming I am a SX, whether it's true and it's not true, because I'm very aware of the negative possibilities. In fact, this maybe you can also speak on from Entp perspective. Normally when I face with something, I actually try to deliberately look at the worst, a couple of worst case scenarios, but only so I can generate a few possibilities that are not fully baked by saying, oh yeah, I can handle this worst outcome. And now I'm going to focus on making it the best outcome. It might be self-serving because I'm kind of just, I'm not saying falsely, but at some level trying to reassure myself, yeah, but it'll all be fine. But I have to look at the worst and I'm detached and I can live with it, but then I'll let go. Because I notice I have some friends, they look at the worst, but then when they look at it, they get stuck in it. They make it like, they treat it like reality. So almost what calms me down for them is just a trigger to make them go crazy, to run away with believing the worst case scenario is going to happen. Whereas for me, it's really just, I look into darkness. Can I handle darkness? There's 3-4 things I can do. I'm not trapped because I have options and I trust myself that I can come up with others or grab one of these 3 branches that I have to deal with that crap. But I'm very, in that sense, I'm always thinking about contingencies, even in a work context. And it serves me well in a loose sort of sense, right? So it's sort of maybe a contradiction of, oh, why does he look at the worst? But I think I do it so I can convince myself I can handle it. Right? So
yeah. It's just a way of reframing negatives into positives in its own sort of way.
Yeah, and the Enneagram 7 has a fixation on planning. And so in a sense, like it's envisioning the negative possibilities and it's like, okay, so now that I know like a loose plan, like, all right, I can handle it. All right, so then I don't have to focus on that. I can reframe it and then I can make the best out of the situation. So I'm wondering if the fixation of gluttony might appear a little differently in ENTPs than it does in other types. Like maybe you guys seek variety in areas that other Enneagram 7s may not be going to. Or maybe it's the same areas. Like there's intersection, there's overlap, and there's also like maybe some trends that are more ENTP-ish.
Well, for me, it was definitely reading books and consuming information in vast quantities.
Yeah.
And I do regret not having partied more. You know, I've not gone to festivals and raves and done all of that. I wish I'd done more of that, but I just was reading all the time.
Quite a few ENTPs and ENFPs can relate to that, which is why a lot of ENFPs actually score Enneagram 5 on Enneagram tests, but they're really 7s. And the reason why is they love consuming books, like what you were talking about, Samantha. And so they're like, oh, I'm actually a 7, but the way that I consume as a 7 can also be knowledge because NE loves to learn new ideas and new concepts and new theories. So that can overlap a little bit. When
I lived in London, I consumed the theatre. I went to the theatre like once or twice a week for the whole time I was there. When I moved to Auckland, I went to every new cafe. Like I was always at a new cafe. So it's always like wherever I'm living, what is that one thing I can consume in vast quantities that feels exciting? You know, excitement feels like the best emotion to me and I kind of want to live with it permanently. And it's like, oh, how can we chase more excitement? Like what is the exciting thing? What does that look like? So,
and it's a chase that's more interesting, right? I mean, I had a discussion with Joyce about about motivation and even how extroverted and introverts are different, probably from a neurotransmitter level. I mean, it's probably dopamine. The pursuit of novelty or experience is probably modulated by dopamine, and it's actually not so much a result. It's the anticipation of chasing something is better than, that's why for me sometimes if I do something very interesting or I have a great project, when it comes to an end, it's almost like it's really sad.
Yes.
Because the journey's over. I live for the journey. I want to get to a final. I can pick another one, but it's like, I did an awesome job. Yeah.
And I'd much rather get a surprise a week or 2 weeks before it happens. Because if you just surprise me with something on the day, I haven't had time to enjoy all the anticipation.
Yeah. There's also that association with extroverted intuition where the thinking about the thing may be as exciting or more exciting than actually doing the thing. So as Samantha was saying, give me time to ideate about it. That would be super exciting too. And Boris mentions a really interesting point too about the journey is more fun than the destination. So it's like, wow, oh, the journey ended. That's sad. There's a process orientedness to 7s and also to EPs in general too.
Yeah, whereas for somebody like Joyce, it's no, I have the goal. And then when I get there, I feel so happy. Or not, I don't know. But it's it would be, and I would probably be the one that looks for the goal. And then when you reach it, you feel like, wow. I did it, my master plan.
Mm.
Or not. I mean, I'm asking Joyce, obviously, it's about 7s and P.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, I would say generally, if you were to see trends, the J types are more enthused by the end result or the end of the journey, and the P types like the journey and just traveling about the journey too.
I mean, I like both. Let's say in a work context, I have some freedom. and speaking back to why we don't like the doing, that it just has to do, I can in my mind solve 10,000 problems within a day, but then it's almost like a computer. A computer lives in digital time. You have so many cycles, so you can process so much information. But then when you have to do it in the real world, there's just less that you can do, right? But Samantha, I want to ask you sometimes whether it's an Entp thing. What I really sometimes experience is almost like a time warp. I'm sitting with somebody in a business scenario. They describe me a problem, and I swear it's almost like I step into another timeline. I'm brainstorming. I feel I have thought 500 things. I can build this, I can build that. I see all these things. And then I look at the clock. It's like 3 minutes have passed. And then the frustration is, I have to build this. I know how to build this. I'm really good at timing myself. I remember one time it was a project which was like, it involved 400 hours of planning. I actually went through it and planned it ahead in chunks. I delivered 20 hours early. I hated doing it, but I knew I had to do it in order to get there. There was some joy in planning it out, but there's always a joy along the way. It's like, and shit happened. Thank God something went wrong. There's these 3 contingencies. But it's, what was I trying to say about, now I lost my thought in the tangent. Yeah, there's time warp. Do you experience that sometimes? Where you're like, oh my God, 3 minutes passed. And I entered a new world. I think I know what I can do. There's all these options. And then the frustration sets in. But do you find that the time seems to freeze sometimes?
Sometimes, I know, like some days time seems to pass really quickly, and sometimes time seems to pass really slowly. It's like I'm not very connected to time.
So when I meant it's actually going fast. Well, I said the opposite. It's not freezing. It's just 2 minutes passed, but you felt like you went on a journey where you went in a world of possibility, and literally like, oh my God, 2 minutes just passed, and that's all.
Yeah,
and I have to build this. Fuck.
I was the most recent example of that was I was in an Enneagram workshop last year, and we were discussing about growing out of the passion and what that looks like. And I had this moment where it was almost like I lived a lifetime in about 30 seconds, where I could see all of the time wasted in my passion and everything. And I'm like, oh, that was just 30 seconds. Wow. Okay. I could just, my whole life flashed before my eyes, and it felt, yeah. So it definitely can happen. But so 10-ish years ago, I experienced some really extreme stress. And so I don't TI the way I used to in terms of that internal brain experience. So now I have to externalize things more. So because of that, I don't get as much joy out of the thinking because I can't see all the pieces moving inside my brain the way I could before. So pre this incident, I could just see all the pieces of information, like all visual, just moving inside my head like a great big whirlstorm that eventually like things would just connect and I could just see it all happening. And now I can't. So everything has to be externalized. I have to write it down. I have to make it. I have to connect the dots almost externally because things doesn't work the same anymore.
I find that interesting, and I don't want to intrude on something that's very personal because I'm trying to understand what type of experience caused that shift. Is it? I mean, I don't want to even use words to describe it. I leave it up to you because that sounds very interesting and at some level traumatic almost.
Prolonged stress, prolonged cortisol and adrenaline exposure due to being in the wrong career, in the wrong workplace, and feeling like I had no choices. Like every part of my life was not working, and I felt very trapped, and not able to escape it in some way. And it culminated when I was living in London. I think all those pieces had been there for a while, but they all came together at the exact same time. And yeah, just prolonged stress. And I'd been ignoring that stress for a very long time. So the only way my body could really get me to pay attention was to take away the thing I valued the most, my ability to think, and remember and hold all that stuff together.
Thanks for sharing that. A lot of people wonder about the intersection of like what can change your brain chemistry permanently. It's kind of like the Phineas Gage thing. For those unfamiliar, it's like there's this psychological case where there was a pole or a pipe or something and it went into someone's head and then they had a personality shift, it opens up the discussion, like how much does it take for someone to have like a permanently altered personality and what events can cause it. So that really does open the door for speculation. So thanks for letting us know about that.
I was just going to say, it's definitely forced me to become more intuitive in a way, and in a more of a sensory way, like what are the messages I'm getting from my body, and let's trust that. So a different kind of intuition than we'd think out with NE. That's how I've coped instead.
Yeah.
And to speak of, you mentioned brain chemistry. It's two things: brain chemistry, but also brain anatomy. Because I mean, brain is really a neural network, and things that are very important when you talk about cortisol is a relation between amygdala and the hippocampus, right? And there's the fear-based or concern regulation actually tends to correlate with cortisol. I think shrinks the hippocampus, which is not a good thing, and might put the amygdalas on a little more alert, which is more primal, more close to sensory, and create sort of a background of an anticipation of when's the next thing gonna hit me, and that's what kind of inhibits the free-flowing state we like to be in, which sometimes is risky because it's so detached. So ideally you want to balance, but it's brain anatomy as well as chemistry and interaction. And I've looked into stuff like hippocampus. It's very interesting, that stuff that I enjoy doing. For example, playing ping pong or dancing of any sort has an amazing benefit on hippocampus. Even at an age of 60 something, you can actually grow the hippocampus noticeably in seniors just by making them dance, because it's physical movement, which the hippocampus responds to, but also spatial planning, coordination, improvisation, responding to music, which does amazing things. Like I've had a friend who had a stroke. Music therapy in the case of brain injury they studied him. He was a miracle. They said he'd be paralyzed forever, but he was an avid tango dancer. So he got out of his wheelchair. People would call him like, no, let's dance. He can dance again. Yeah. And they said, we don't know how that happened, but so don't underestimate music, movement. So I'm saying everybody should go out there, pick some dance you like. It doesn't have to be salsa.
Yeah, and I started dancing in the last 10 years, and it's been great. It's been absolutely fabulous.
West Coast swing, salsa, how far did you go?
Ciroc. Didn't quite make it to West Coast swing. It was too much footwork. I need the least amount of footwork required.
West Coast is the crown. I think it's the one where you really know your stuff. Salsa is everywhere accessible, but West Coast is the queen or king. It's just a little hard.
I did ballroom dancing years ago. I went, oh no, this is too structured.
That's
too many rules.
Crusty.
Where's the free-flowing improvisation dance? That's the one I want.
Exactly.
This might demonstrate a quality of the 7 too, which is channel changing. So like switching topics of variety in conversation. Variety here with this topic, variety there. And so common speech patterns you'll see in 7s is some of them have a little bit more rapid pace when they talk. Like with Boris, he just talks like a little faster. And sometimes they like, this doesn't apply for all of them, but sometimes they have a twinkle in their eye because they're always looking at new things externally or variety or consuming the world in a fascinated and excited way. And that can show up in how their eyes are twinkly and like, I'm on the lookout for the new things that I can glutton.
Mine are too beady to twinkle. I should have been Asian, but I have this weird flap on the top.
Whereas I've just locked myself in a low sense. There's no sensory here in this room, so I can remain focused.
The darting 7 eyes. What's new? And so how does the Enneagram 7 show up in you guys?
Well, I mean, definitely the faster speech patterns, definitely the tangents, absolutely. Definitely looking away because it's not, firstly, head types don't feel comfortable maintaining eye contact or, too intensely being close to people in that sense. So head types naturally just break contact to ease the tension between them. But also as they get new ideas or they're thinking things or they're trying to choose which tangent to choose between, they can look away to try and process that. And I definitely do all of those things. And one of the challenges is that some people think that you're lying or being shifty when you're looking away, and really you're just information processing. You're trying to pick a thread because there's so many to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, she was picking the kind of physiological tangent. In general, like 7, it's a stereotype of being very optimistic, seeking novelty, which can be intellectual and also circumstantial. I mean, I like to go dancing, but I also like to be the introvert at the back of the room, looking at all the people thinking, okay, who's interested in whom? What's going to happen? And just projecting things. So, yeah, and there is avoidance of pain, but seeking out the pleasureful and quote unquote good, and I don't like good or bad because he says such FI terms, but also an awareness of, just as a contrast of, there's misery in the world I need to look at, but I might as well be optimistic and maybe a need for not being trapped. Even when I look at the bad stuff, I need to know I have options. I do not want to be in a room without an exit door, right? I might be in a relationship, which is great, but I need to know it's not a trap, because then I would leave. But if it's almost like, hey, I'm here by choice, and it's been years, and I'm here by choice, right? So fear of being entrapped. But it's also, here's a question. I wonder, and this is a few data points, whether you can explain a 7 based on, you can explain a person, but the question is nature versus nurture. I think I've seen patterns in my life which kind of might have predisposed me to being a 7, even though my brother probably is not a 7, and we're only 1 year apart. Like, I've often experienced being trapped by the impulsive and poorly thought of actions of somebody else that might trap you for a year. Like my father did certain things in his business. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a 2-year piece of misery. I know how it's going to end because I can NE it. I will have to help him because of business, but it's going to be a death march. And having been exposed to that, and therefore wanting to have the ultimate decisive power still with me and not be the subject of somebody else's poor decisions that trap you for extended periods of time. So I could make an association between some things I experienced and who I've become. Mind you, on the flip side, my brother, he's ESFJ, same cognitive functions, but totally different. He's a very different person. So maybe it's not a good data set. I just wonder, what do you think about it? And nature versus nurture in general, which is a tough topic and something so ethereal as.
I think for me, I can't be trapped by anybody else. I can be trapped by myself. So when I was growing up and I wanted to leave home and I didn't have any choices, I was like, okay, leaving home is probably a dumb idea. So I will choose to stay here because in the future that'll be better for me, but I'm not going to like it. But I had to impose that on myself versus if someone tried to impose that on me, I'd just, I'd be out, I find it's, so it's a bit, I think that's a bit different in terms of that perspective. But I suppose I sort of see, or sort of the approach that I'm learning in terms to the Enneagram is that we're our Enneagram type is part of our DNA. It's formed we have it while we're in utero, we're born with it. And the way we see the world as we're growing up is already through that lens. So each child in the family will see the exact same things through their own Enneagram lens and therefore interpret it and respond to it differently. And the level of stress you have in that childhood would then, indicate how defended you need to be or what other parts of the Enneagram you need to reach out to for extra resources to cope. But we've done, I've observed work with sexual 9s who had merged with their twin in utero and that twin died. And so, so those sort of patterns can start really early, those, pivotal shaping experiences. So I think it's both. It's nature and nurture.
Yeah, and to speak then, again, your fellow Entp, I'm not trying to contradict you. I'm just trying to put a new spin on it and point to the distinction between DNA and early development, because DNA it's like you build a computer. It tells you what hardware components are in there, but it doesn't explain you having experience with a computer. There's software in there as well. I believe there might be a predisposition, but what I often find, and I've known a few identical twins, it might not be fully written into the sequence in the DNA, but it might be early semi-random formative experiences. For example, and this is just a stretched example, a certain aspect of a person's personality may be shaped, or when you grow up, your brain sort of semi-randomly decides to organize in different groups, right? You start with a cell that specializes, and there might be random events where a certain part of your neural network, which is not determined by DNA, its experiences trigger certain neurons to fire together, wire together, and shape a person. It might be random where, for example, if a certain aspect of your emotionality was shaped at a certain age, and this is kind of a fake simplistic, it may make a difference whether you are in the midst of winter when that aspect of yours, which has to do with trust, is created while you're freezing your buns off, versus, it's spring, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. You might have a different software imposed over your DNA, even though DNA sets the limits of what you can, but aspects of personality might be semi-random depending on what happened when you were shaping that aspect of your brain network that controls it. Because and especially with twins, I find they often are almost each other's opposite. But that's partly an adaptation where they choose roles. Like one's the extrovert, one's the introvert. Low data set. So the main point was DNA, but I don't believe it's DNA. It's DNA and random aspects that form you while your brain, which is an analog
we don't come in as blank slates, though. Our brains already have some pre-programming even from birth.
Yeah, I would agree. I just wonder where the cutoff is. But some people say, it's determined. It's not in the genes, because I've known too many identical twins that are very different personalities.
Mm.
So it's not to contradict. It's just to nuance, saying, well, let's say you wanted the analogy of a computer, and I'm a tech geek. Maybe this doesn't appeal to many people. The hardware you put on the desk really determines what you could possibly do with that thing. If it's a little laptop, you can do certain things. If it's a big monster, you can make a half supercomputer, a gaming rig. So it constrains it, but then what matters is the software that's loaded, and that is somewhat random based on interactions, but which doesn't contradict. It's just, I find often people say, it's in the DNA. I'm like, qualify. It's what percentage, right? And I'm getting from you're in the nature plus nurture. Just sometimes I hear people, it's all DNA, it's not DNA, it's somewhere.
Oh, right. No, I think
I'm not saying you are. I'm just speaking to.
No, well, see, I think of it, so each Enneagram type is associated with certain psychological defenses, like strategies for survival that we all use. So the 7s use rationalization, idealization, and devaluation, whereas the 5s use intellectualization and compartmentalization. And so each of the type has these, and all of those, every person has access to all of those defenses inside of their, I don't know if you want to call it software or how you want to work it, but we have access to all of them. But there's some we reach to first, and that's based on our, personality type that, I think comes with us. That's our first port. And if those aren't enough, we're then going to reach out because we have access to all of them. And then as we grow up, we find it easier to let go of certain ones, bar our primary one. Yeah. That's how I think about it.
I entirely agree with both of you. Yeah.
I like that you're such a peacemaker. You agree with both of you. I mean, we're not disagreeing. It's just funny. I like the way you work.
We're just looking at it from a different angle. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love the way you say that. That's so FE of you. Joyce, you're such a peacemaker.
So I heard agree with both of your takes on it. And Boris's argument, it presents a lot of food for thought, even for like the MBTI community too. There's that huge nature versus nurture debate. And most people in the MBTI community say it's like purely nature. But then the implication comes from identical twins who have the exact same DNA structure, but they have different MBTI types. And so it's like, are they mistyped? Are they the same type? Or is a part of your type formed by nurture too? So I think that's a great conversation item that people don't talk enough about. So who knows what the answer truly is, but that allows for more critical thought to be there. It's probably a percentage of both sides.
That's what I would say. So we would only bicker about, is it 65 or 35, if at all. And I would say they have the same DNA. And if you do in functional fMRI imaging, you will probably see a very different structure, because growth of a plant is random. 2 plants that have the exact same seed, they will grow differently based on random things that are formative, right? Because at that point in time, you were vulnerable to that aspect being shaped. And it's just to inject which I ultimately want to see, let everything as a percentage to me, mostly. It's anything black or white. I have friends who I find are very black or white, and it's not, it really offends me. It's just, it doesn't do the world justice. If you look at jungle, I've said it just before, if you have only a black pen, black or white, it will never look like the jungle, because you're just not using enough colors to capture the beauty of something. So I'm hesitant of anything that very quickly is good or bad, black or white. These are sort of almost trigger words for me. It's like, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad. I'm like, hold on. Anyways.
And we all have such unique experiences. Like no one's experience isn't like anyone else's. And so I think you've got to have space for all of that too.
Yeah, I agree. And so that brings us to the 2 error points. So for the 7, it is the 1 and 5. How do you both experience your lines to 1 and 5?
I'll start with 5 because sort of the place I've spent the last 10 years hanging out in, being a little bit too in recovery mode and a bit too, introverted in that sense. But the 5 gave me a way to be introverted that I really needed, and permission to be introverted and to stay in that space. So then I could start to look at feelings and ask for help and just not be as distracted by the world around me. So when I moved to New Zealand, I was both disappointed and secretly happy because there was nothing to do. And so there was nothing I could be distracted by. And eventually it gave me space to finally settle down and create some more groundingness for myself, which then has allowed me to start to move into 1, to be more focused, to prioritize better, to get things done, and to really decide on, what is the way I want to impact the world. So I don't need to do everything. I don't need variety. I can almost have quite a simple minimalist life where I do just what I love to do every day. And it doesn't need all the variety to be satisfied.
Yeah, 5 I can. I mean, it might be my background is math and physics. So I do trust, ultimately, I trust my TI. TI is actually probably my bedrock when it comes to decision making, but FE informs it and injects some humanity into it. So I associate TI with 5. I think TI is a place I can be home. It's almost like I switch something else off. If I need to solve a problem that would require TI or 5-like behavior, it's something I'm at home at if I need to be, even though I don't live there because my soul isn't there. In terms of 1, could I maybe somewhat associate with SI, but that may not be the strongest association. I've been called a selectively anal slob. Like some stuff at work, I'm very chill. My desk is messed up. You see my shirts, but stuff that matters to me, especially let's say a coding context, I can almost be a soup Nazi. But then I think I can back up why we want to do it A, B, or C, but we don't want to do that other stuff. So I feel almost like a selective ISTJ in that context, which I would associate with that structure wanting to impose. So question for Samantha, would it be okay to loosely associate SI with being a 1 or SI being strong in a 1? Or is that maybe I made a 1?
Well, you have to remember you can have INFJs who are 1s. So again, you can see all types at the 1. So it's not just purely sensory in that form, but the 1s are a body type. So they are naturally going to be more sensory anyway. Okay. And they do want to have a sense of structure. They want to know the rules because what they're trying to do is avoid blame in some way. And they avoid blame by doing exactly what the rules tell them to do. And so there is an imposition of structure because their childhood experience was having to be on someone else's timetable, not able to follow their own instincts per se. And so being pressured to be, not listen to their own physical or, bodily instincts.
Yeah, I still don't listen. I'm just kidding.
There is a correlation between the STJ types like ISTJs and ESTJs and Enneagram 1.
That's kind of what I thought. That was the loose, and I'm talking statistical correlation, not deterministic by any way or form, right?
There are some qualities of Enneagram 1 that do resonate with some like stereotypical STJ traits, like there's one right way to do things is typically associated with STJs. There's one right way to fold your laundry, or there's one right way to cook an egg. There's one right way to cut an onion. You cut it like this. And that's associated with SI and TE together because the TE is logical order and controlling how it's done. So it's done right. And the SI has a specific way that it likes it done, like a very detailed way. But like the different types can all be 1, but they'll manifest the 1 in different ways.
And what you just described was more of a social 1, more of I know the right way to do it and I model it for others. Whereas the self-preservation one's more perfectionistic. I must be perfect, but I never manage to be perfect. And the sexual one's more of has greater access to anger. So they tend to be more of a reformer. I want to perfect others. And so we could quite possibly see different Myers-Briggs types at each of those different subtypes.
100% agree. 10,000%.
I think I have more tension with the 1 than with the 5. The 5 I'm comfortable with. The 1, because it has all this only one option. It fights with NE, or just my general. The moment somebody speaks in absolutes, I'm like, oh yeah, let me challenge you on that. So, but I'm sure I can be as selectively, slob.
I remember several years ago, I was sitting down to go, right, what's my next job? Because I'd come to the end of a contract or whatever it was. And I was like, right, I could do these 4 different things. I'm like, those are 4 very different careers, and I'd been holding on to those options because that way you have more jobs you could apply for or more contracts you can go for. And I was like, okay, actually, maybe it's time to choose the one, which is the one career path that gives you the most joy, that gives you the most excitement, that you want to sort of start deep diving into. And then I let go of the other 3. And for me, I think of it as that sort of thing. It was being able to give up the options that I felt kept me safe, and able to go, actually, we'll be safe if we just choose the one path as well. Like, we can live with that constraint.
I find that interesting because if you're SP, then you have a very different high-level driver or co-driver in the boat than I do, right? Because what you described probably stems from SP, right? Because I would not word things in terms of making decisions because it's safe, but for you it is because you're SP, whereas I'm SX, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What Boris is saying he lives on the edge.
I am the edge. Hey, when I was 3 or 4 years old, I jumped off the roof of a building, and I still have that feeling. I remember that feeling. I get excited when I look down on a large distance downward. There's an excitement, a positive excitement as well. But I jumped off of the roof of a building with an umbrella, and it was saved by a truck that was too close to the wall.
Okay, I went skydiving many, many years ago, and I controlled all of my fear, so I felt absolutely nothing for the whole experience. And I got to the end and went, I was meant to feel the fear. That was the point of the exercise.
You can do it again.
No, that's unnecessary.
There's an excitement. If you ever stand at the edge of something and look down, it's...
No, because I might jump off.
Yeah? Just make sure you have an umbrella.
And I don't want to jump off. To hold myself back from jumping off.
Cool. You can kind of figure out your subtype sometimes through your relationship with fear. It seems like the sexual instinct has an intensity with diving into like hitting fear. It's almost like this intensity with fear. It's like, bam. Whereas like the self-pres type is like, I don't want to feel fear. Fear feels like it's threatening my safety. And so no.
That's a really interesting insight. That's new. I mean, I think that's an interesting thought.
I wonder how the social approaches this. One day we will find an ENTP.
They'll hug it as like, we'll all get along.
The ENTP 7. Yeah.
All right.
If anyone has any anxiety, I tend to check if there is self-preservation, because often the anxiety can be coming from that self-preservation instinct, that desire to be safe in some way.
And since you've been an expert, Samantha, I mean, those 3, they're all in a hierarchy. Do you find there's some combinations that are more extreme where the first and the third are further apart than otherwise?
They can be for some people. For some people, they can have one very strong dominant or one very strong oppressed, or they can have 2 that are closer together. The combinations can vary for people. I know that my social oppressed shows up as being almost a fear of large groups. So I don't like to go to music festivals or other places where there's lots of people, because that makes me feel anxious.
Which aspect is that? Because I don't like going there because I hate noise. I mean, I dance a lot. I used to go to clubs, but I always had small custom-made earplugs, and they would laugh at me. I'm like, fuck you. I'm not going to blast my eardrums. But it always has something about being in a crowd. I would never do that
because it would ruin the experience.
No, it's like having a volume. You don't want to have jet air.
I think it's that sense of safety of not having an anchor. So some self-pres 7s describe the need to have an anchor, to someone to connect to in some way. And so the self-pres types tend to want to be alone a little bit more. They're more likely to withdraw from people, where the sexual type's more likely to be comfortable one-on-one, and the social more likely to be comfortable in a group setting in some way. And so at a large event like a music festival, I'd want to withdraw, but then that's also not so there's people everywhere. And who do you go back to, and where's the exit? And if I just want to take a time out, how do I do that and then come back again? So it's just, I think for whatever your repressed function is, there is some aspect of life that you're trying to pretend almost doesn't exist, or is so uncomfortable that you almost try and forget about it, but you can never really forget about it because it, constantly shows up when you're in that sort of space.
Makes sense. How do your instincts show up in your life then?
I haven't left the house much recently. And my self-preservation would always have me thinking about what am I eating today? My plan for the day is, what are my 3 meals? Where's my food coming from today? So the self-preservation instinct for me as a dominant is food related, warmth related. Am I wearing enough clothes? Do I have a scarf? Does my handbag have enough pens in it? Am I carrying everything I'm going to possibly need? And so it's almost resource and material focused around those needs in some way. That's how my primary one shows up.
Which I find interesting because it's my last, and it's sort of the opposite. I could forget to eat. I'm like, oh, I didn't eat today. No wonder I'm hungry. Well,
I would love to forget to eat.
Say again?
I would love to forget to eat. It carries so much weight in my brain. I'm like, oh, is there enough food in the house? Where's the next meal coming from? What's going on?
Yeah, and then I think based on your earlier statement, my SX and SO are closer, and the SP is sitting way over there, which makes me, sometimes I do not look after my own interest for a long time. For example, this is an example. I had billings from a certain company. I didn't bill them for 3 months. Interest rates are low, but I just have to send them a bill. But I'm more interested in, okay, tomorrow I have this other meeting. There's this other guy. Oh, there's something I might be able to do with him. I really connect well with him, and I want to help these people out. And I forget to get my own. I even took a brief loan out from a line of credit just to pay something that came up, and I'm thinking 3 months. I let them. This money could be making money for me, but it's something I struggle with because it's just less of a priority than meeting that other guy tomorrow and finding something that he likes and building something for him quickly that he's happy with, right? So.
Was outstanding invoices like that are very stressful for me because it's almost threatening my survival at a subconscious level. I find it a lot.
It seems like self-preservation last sometimes can sound like ADHD a little bit too, because like people with ADHD are known for forgetting about their own needs because they're like, oh wait, I forgot that I had to do those bills, or I forgot that I had to eat, or I forgot that I'm supposed to do these things, or else I have extreme penalties after.
Yeah, but it's a conscious prioritization. Every time I say it comes up, it's like, oh no, I'm not going to do it this week because I think it's more important that I get this done. So I'm aware of it. It just doesn't bother me. I mean, I'm managing my finances. I get stuff in time, but it's sort of a degree of priority. I would rather get that new gig going. And now, when I get to it, I can be, my accountant says, Boris, you could have been an accountant. I'm like, yeah, but I would be pulling my hair out because I do my own numbers. I give them to him. He's like, okay, I have very little to do. You can do it yourself. I'm like, I want you to double check it. But it's a lack of fun. Again, I think there's a correlation. NE and SP probably are on opposite of the spectrum. I mean, I could be wrong. But NE doesn't like the SP personality type too much, or it has some issues with it.
Tensions. Yeah. And I mean, conversely, with the social repressed, I had 2 engagements this week, social events, and I almost had to, for one of them, I had to trick myself into going. And I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be really uncomfortable. Now I had a fabulous time. But although I could have easily stayed home on the couch and just binge watch television as opposed to go out to this social event. So I can forget to prioritize because I fear the uncomfortableness of going to social events at times. Well, especially social events with lots of strangers. Let me clarify.
I find the relationship between SX and SO sort of interesting. And there were people in my MBTI group that had challenged that, oh, you're probably SO because they see how I behave in a group context. They go together, but for me, really, SO is a great way of herding together these potential one-on-one interactions. I still care for the group, like I do things for the group's benefit, but it's slightly secondary to, and still, by having them all in one spot, I have more possibilities of taking that person in the corner, because that's ultimately when I feel best. So when in a physical meetup, I make sure the group is happy, but then I grab a random table, spend 20 minutes with them, and then look at my group again. But it's sort of the two go together really well
Absolutely.
Whereas I could see SP and SX actually, I don't know. SP is just my sort of blind spot, using improper terminology maybe, but it's just interesting that you are, Samantha, you're in many levels like me and also very different, which again speaks to, even if we're combining two typing systems and allow for all the permutations, really there's so much variation within each type or subtype or artificially created type, right? So
absolutely.
It's very true, yeah. The stereotypical ENTP that would be easy to type would be a 7 that's social sexual or sexual social with the self-pres repressed. EPs in general, it's easy to type an EP who's an Enneagram 7 and has SP repressed. That's like the stereotype of the EP. And so if you have an extrovert who has the subtype stack of self-pres first and social repressed, they're gonna look like a pseudo introvert, and people could mistype them, or they could mistype themselves as an introvert. And so that's interesting. You can see why people would accidentally mistype when you get to involve other systems too.
Well, and social 7s can look like 2s and 9s because they're far more giving and selfless and idealistic. And so you can see why that would easily get confused as well.
Here's a question. Would you say SP is kind of tied to SE in a sense, like that as SP knows about the state of the body, when you say about planning stuff, SP is close to the physical body in some way or another, or the physical experience. Would you kind of agree with that? I mean, SP is cool.
In some way, self-preservation could be about that because it is a little more about the body. But I would also say the body types, 8, 9s and 1s, are more attuned to what's happening in the body, if we're thinking of it in that context.
Or maybe just sort of just nibbling away on different portions that might be part of some bigger cake or may not connect. I find, I'm ENTP, so SE is not high in my stack, but I find I actually very much enjoy being in sync or being aware of my physical surrounding in certain contexts. For example, like dancing. I mean, you dance yourself, Samantha, but you mentioned a couple of dances. Did you say, sorry, what was your primary dance? Or?
Sarok was the main partner dance.
Could you, I've heard of it, Sarok. Can you classify it? Is it sort of...
Think of it as West Coast swing with less footwork.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's a very... Those kind of dances are very appealing because you're in the moment. I mean, there's an exchange component, which I find it's also in all these non-ballroom formalized dances. But it's a great place to be. I enjoy SE very much in this select context. Same with playing table tennis. Like if you're at a certain level, I don't care so much about the points, but there's something about experiencing my movement, iteratively refining, being aware of how do I hit that thing. There's a pleasure that I don't know if it's normally contributed to being an ENTP. It's almost something like that I would expect an SE dom to have, but it's accessible to me in select areas, which either have to do with mastery, let's say how do you hit a ball, where do you hit it, and of course the dancing part, because you in SX loves dancing because you have an exchange with a stranger. It's like an instant, it's a 3-minute affair with somebody that might not be your type, but in that moment,
I find that part really hard.
Say again?
I find the being with someone in that space really challenging, and I've had to learn to have different boundaries around dancing with a partner in that way. So I had to learn to dance with my eyes closed. You know, learning to follow was extremely challenging for me. So I just closed my eyes.
Try learning to lead. That's even harder.
Yeah. I'm never going to learn to lead. I was like, no, we're never going to learn to lead. We're going to just learn to follow. I think that's a bigger challenge. But yeah, because for me, I appreciate the physical flow and being in that space. But when I first started dancing, I wanted to be creative all over the place. I wanted to iterate and play before I knew the basics. So I had to rein myself in, learn the foundations, rein in my creativity, close my eyes so I could learn to follow and trust someone before I could then add in the play with it. And so for me, it was actually, I had to make it more of an SI type experience, like let's just learn the repetition. Let's, the SI-SE piece before I could enjoy it, bring the NE into it in a way.
I find that interesting because I agree with you. And also my experience is different because I'm SX. I also find, I'm not the best motory learner. I literally have to break it down. It takes me a long time to learn something. but then I know it really well and I can teach it. I can say, okay, my weight is here, my weight is there. So I had to overcome this, but it was not out of fear of engaging. It's literally, I have clumps of clay as my hands. How am I going to learn how to write on or paint? So I had to grow these fingers out of clumps of clay, which became knowing all these little things almost in a methodical way. And then all of a sudden, then they can suddenly connect and you can improvise. And that's when the joy begins. But I think for you, there was a different experience because it was also SP, safety. Somebody is in my space. I have to relate to them. So there was this tornness between wanting to connect, but also being safe. And it's a very different experience, yet there's some overlap. I find that fascinating based on SP versus SX.
And did you do competitions?
I didn't go to the competition level. I mean, you might be it.
It was awful. I didn't know it at the time, but my social press absolutely hated it. I had to stop competing after a while. Like, this is torture. You are torturing yourself. Let's just do the fun stuff.
I was too SX because I enjoy the exchange. I don't have to win something. But I mean, it was just, I didn't have the time. But it can be obsessive. I don't know, but you most Celta dancers I know, when they start, they either stop or they go 3, 4, 5 times a week.
Yeah,
have like
I've done
20
that.
hours.
I did the 5 times a week thing. Yeah.
But for me, it's this social thing. It's like, I don't care about points. I don't want to drive somewhere. I want to know everybody. And I mean, you probably relate now. It's something that happens in that magic space where you have no relationship to that person. They might even be, there are certain physical types you enjoy, or you might really enjoy dancing with somebody that you would in another context not pursue in a date sense or whatever. It's a different world. And it lives for the duration of the song, and then you look forward to it next time. But it lives in its own world, and it has its own rules that are different from what you do otherwise socializing.
Yeah, I definitely relate to it a little bit differently because there was, to me, so much happened in that space between two people. A lot of stuff that I wasn't very comfortable with, and knowing how to manage the social interaction one-on-one. So I'd much rather have an intense conversation with someone where I know where our boundaries are than, I have to go into a space of complete trust and follow and not be in control. And I'm like, you want me to not, what? That's a lot for me to process.
You said something interesting because I would associate ENTP with constantly questioning and selectively challenging, sometimes violating, but for split seconds, boundaries to map another person. I thought that was hardcore ENTP, but for an SP, it may not be. It's more in my nature, but it may not be in yours as much.
Yeah, that's something about ENTPs that often doesn't resonate with me. For me, it's more sensing the vibe of someone or the experience. I'm not very good at actually getting to know people. I think this might be maybe self-preservation 7 because we're a little more self-interested. We're more focused on ourselves, and it's, the ego state is more, how can this person help me meet my needs in some way? And so it can take me a very long time to get to know someone, and it happens, but it can take years. It's not a quick process. Either we'll talk about the superficial stuff or we'll talk about things that are interesting or all the concepts, but it'll take me a while to really get to know a person in a way that sticks. We talked about finding my values. It can take me just as long to figure out someone else as it took me to figure out my own, what was most important to me. I find that it just doesn't come naturally for me.
That is very interesting and really points to the SXSP, because for me, it's a total opposite. Most of my friends, and this is not just dating, it's guy friends. I meet them. I have this intensive, we talk all night, and then we might be friends for life. This is how my close friends, guy friends, lady friends, I seek that experience. Whereas for you, it's the last thing you want. So I find that interesting.
It takes a lot more practice, intentional practice.
Fascinating. And so 7s have a stereotype of seeking out good times. And so oftentimes they kind of like to seek out friends with shared interests. But I was wondering, is that true? Is that not? Like, it's almost like having friends that can come along with their shenanigans. What are your thoughts?
I'd say so. Yeah, but I mean, I went mountain biking yesterday, and a friend, I wouldn't have gone unless a friend and I were going together, most likely. I'm very creative. I paint and do a lot of craft stuff. And I have a friend who's also interested in that. So we can do those activities together. We can go traveling together. So I'm equally happy doing some things completely alone, and I sometimes prefer to do them alone. I don't know if you've had this experience, Boris, but you can go to the movies, and if I've suggested the movie to someone and they come along, I spend more time being aware of how they respond to the movie and whether they like it or dislike, and whether the choice I've made or the recommendation I've made is any good. Whereas if I just go by myself, I can completely enjoy or not enjoy the movie as it is. Like I can be more in the experience of it. Whereas when I go with someone or just watching at home, it's more of a sense of how do they feel about it. And, I almost feel like that's the FE piece coming into play a little, overworking itself about worrying about something it shouldn't be worrying about.
I would agree with that, probably to a slightly less intensity, but I agree with that, because then it's like, oh, well, this is a shared experience. And I asked somebody, what do you want to watch? And I would like to watch something that they also enjoy. Ideally, it's not something that I hate. Whereas if I watch stuff for my own interest, it's a different experience. They're both, I enjoy both, right? It's nice to watch something then with somebody. It's almost like ritual with some people, certain shows. You have to promise, I'm going to watch that with you because, hey, we saw the first episode together, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I definitely have a friend that we watch all the sci-fi TV shows and movies together. And that way I know we're both going to like it for the most part, because we were like, okay, we know we're in the same genre, so this is fine.
Very cool. The Sevens, they're known for, getting people enthused and excited to get along and to do this thing, almost to get activity partners for some of them to do things with. But
yeah, I wonder though, it's not that specific that I only seek out certain people with the same interests. It's more, I look for a shared abstract mindset, which is open-minded, playful. Somebody doesn't have to enjoy salsa. Salsa is very compartmentalized, actually. Talking about dancing, it's great, but it lives only in its own world. It can be very one-dimensional. People that I enjoy dancing with, I would not go anywhere else with them because there's no connection. You realize we have this SE connection, it's a flirt, and then I won't talk to you. I'm like, oh man, we're so different. But it's more abstract mindsets which tend to correlate to liking similar things. But I also like people that are very different, that expose me to something that I would have never done before. Like I remember in university, there was one guy, we were strange friends. I was always me, but he was like a metalhead punk kind of guy, very clever, but take me to some punk place, and it was kind of an interesting experience to float in this world. Obviously, I didn't fit in. I have weird hair, but I was the outsider. Or one African American friend of mine who I met through, we were both in physics. He really introduced me. It was an almost African American group. I was like the weird white guy that didn't fit, but I liked dancing. So it was like house, and I was very welcome. It was a great experience. So similarity, mostly open-minded mindset, but please also be divergent, because you can show me something new that I wouldn't have known about.
Yeah. And so thank you for coming out. I really appreciate hearing about the ENTP and Enneagram 7 experience. It's nice to see the contrast in the subtypes between you both and how the SP versus SX really makes a difference. I was not aware of how dramatic the difference was until I talked to you both. And so that was like the mind-blowing experience.
For me too, it was really, Samantha, you provided a really new experience. Like, wow, it's within that 7 commonality, live totally different motivation that might look the same, but we are different creatures. And thank God, otherwise life would be boring, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's not often that we get these opportunities to have this almost more of a direct contrast, when you know certain things to be true. Like, okay, so what's the one tiny thing we're variating, and how does that show up, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it was really, really cool. And so, Samantha, thanks for coming out. She does really cool YouTube channel work with Truity, and she is extremely knowledgeable in the Enneagram too. And so I really like that expertise that you brought to the panel. You are a wealth of knowledge. Everything that you've consumed has made your mind into a solid piece of gold. And so you're just able to transmute that gold into our conversation. So it's been extremely fruitful, and you really enriched us with the gold within your mind. And so thank you.
Don't transmute the gold. Once it's gold, keep it. Don't transmute it again. You get some radioactive isotope. Stop at the goal.
Boris's business advice.
No, that was physics.
Yeah, I don't do physics. I think I lasted
No, I
one
do. It's my
session in
lifeline.
that. I'm like, no, physics is not for me.
I wonder if the sexual instinct too enjoys the confrontational banter sometimes a little bit more too. Like, you know how Boris always like interjects with these really cheeky kind of jokes, but they're kind of like pushing the edge a little bit. And they cause tension, actually. So maybe it's SX tension too. On top
Yeah, and I want to qualify. Samantha, I mean, I was maybe making judgment. I assume I didn't offend you. There was no intent in any way or form, because I thought I can be free reign. But it's deliberate, actually. It is. I deliberately, I enjoy a certain type of tension, but I read the other person. Like if I hit FI, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm not miping you anymore. I just go over there, maybe.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there are times when I also say things, I'm like, oh, that might have been more painful than I realized. You know, if I've landed an Enneagram truth on someone, I'm like, oops, I forget sometimes that hurts people. But yeah, I can do conflict and I can do debating, but often I would rather not. It's, unless the debate is in sort of a construct where it is safe or permissible to debate, I may not go there.
And even the word debate, I mean, I wasn't into debating in university or high school. I like the word banter. Banter is my favorite thing, where you read the other person and then you find something where you can have fun jousting at each other and getting to know each other. But hardcore arguments, because I think there's a stereotype about ENTPs wanting to argue for the sake of arguing. We argue because either we believe and we want to communicate something, or we want to hone our skills with somebody that is of equal mindset, or we want to engage and get to know and play. So I don't think there's any, I got to be right. It's like, no, I love being proved wrong. If we have an exchange, let's say if you convince me of astrology, I'll be like, wow, I just learned something. I'll make your life hard, but I am actually looking to be defeated, right? It's not about winning. It's teach me something new. I will bow like, wow.
Whereas I think I still have a little more of a focus on harmony in some form. And so that can undermine that harmony in some way. So I'm quite sensitive to creating tension, and then I feel the need to ease that tension.
Context dependent, depending. I mean, I'm trying to read the other person.
Of course.
Because again, some people I just, okay, I don't want to tread on anything there, but some are hard to read, like Joyce. It's so much FE.
Just placating all the way. And so thanks, Boris, for being so playful. You always make my panels so much fun. Your entertainment in a person. And so your witty comebacks and your a billion tangents and your 1,000 banter points.
I'm a serious physics guy, okay? In a work context, don't rock my image. They're gonna laugh at me. My colleagues see it. You've got to be careful. Nice meeting you, Samantha, and thanks you, Joyce. As always, it is always fun.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you all in the next episode. Take care.
Bye-bye. Oops, where's my hand? You can't see it. Okay.